When I was growing up, I really could not stand school. See, that's one thing that I elicited a lot of smiles from on that. So you heard all those degrees that I had, and that might give you the false impression that I was really, really interested in school and education and things like that. That wasn't me at all. Up until a good portion of the time in high school, I had one goal in life, and that was to join the United States Marine Corps. So I wanted to be a Marine, and I wanted to be a tank driver. So there you go. So how did I end up here? Well, I went off to college, and mainly because I was interested in a girl, and she was going off to that college. And so I went and chased her. And that's how I got in the door at college, and then I had become a Christian right before that. And then we felt the Lord was leading us into the ministry. So I transferred from South Dakota School of Mines and Technology to Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. And while I was at Moody Bible Institute, one day in the library, I was looking over the magazines that they had in the library, and I found this magazine. Back then, it was only half as big. It was a half page on this, but it was Acts and Facts. And I had been an engineering student for a couple years, and now I was majoring in theology. And I picked this magazine up, and I saw, oh, this magazine relates to science and faith. Science and faith. So I took the magazine back, and I went back into the little cubicle, and I read it. And up until that time, even though I had become a Christian, I had believed what my teachers taught me in school, and I was an evolutionist. I believed in evolution. So you can become a Christian and still believe in evolution because nobody may ever talk to you about creation. That's what this afternoon's talk is about. Well, anyway, I read this magazine, and there were two articles in it, one on an origin of life, and the other was on how organisms that are in the fossil record look very, very similar to the creatures that are living today. I now know that's called stasis. I read those two articles. They were so well written, and they were so clear, and the science was so compelling that, bang, my life was changed, just like that. I was sitting in the cubicle, and I said, this is true. This is true. And up to that time, I didn't know where the Lord was leading me, to be a missionary or to be a pastor or what. And I felt, this will be my calling. This will be my calling to do this creation science. And that was in 1979. 1979. I know you're like, wow, he doesn't even look that old. But it's true. It's true. 1979. So I graduated, a year before I graduated in 1981, I called up the founder of this ministry, Dr. Henry Morris. And I said, you know how I've got I understand engineering, I've got a couple years of engineering, and I have this degree in theology from Moody Bible Institute. I'd really like to work for the Institute for Creation Research. That was in 1981. And he said, well, it's really a science-oriented ministry. I recommend that you go back and you finish your engineering degree and get your engineering degree. So I did. I went back to South Dakota School of Mines and I finished my engineering degree. My wife mysteriously ended up pregnant. I don't know how. But anyway, and I was really poor in college. So I joined the United States Navy because they put me on active duty and I got all the benefits. And so I served some time, almost 10 years in the Navy as a civil engineer. During that time, I still wanted to work for ICR, so I called up my mentor, who was Dr. Henry Morris's colleague, Dr. Dwayne Gish. And Dr. Gish said, yes, we'd like to have you come to ICR. We realize you have a degree in theology. You've got this degree in engineering. By then, I had taken my exams and got my professional engineering degree. He says, that's all nice, but really, really, you need to get a doctorate. And it should be in biology. Biology are like these geeks and dweebs and things like that. And I was an engineer, so this, in my mind, it's like engineering biology, engineering biology. And so I thought, wow, I don't want to do that. And I complained to my wife, and by this time she was no longer pregnant. Anyway, and she said, well, you promised the Lord you'd do this creation science ministry. And then the Lord gave me the idea to go to medical school. So I went to medical school primarily because I wanted to get a doctorate and I wanted to learn biology. I really didn't care about people. So I was like, whoa, I'm not really doing this to help people out, but I want to learn these two things. And while I was in medical school, the Lord used medical school to take me from being like an engineering type of personality to a non-engineering type of personality where I didn't mind touching someone. So it was a big change in those ways. And the Air Force paid for my medical education, so I went into the Air Force. And while I was in the Air Force, they sent me to Harvard to get the Master's in Public Health. And so I thought, well, that'll be good. That'll be good for this ministry. So I eventually called up ICR. I was getting close to retirement. And I said, now, I'd really like to work for ICR. I've got this degree in theology. I got this degree in engineering. I got this PE. I've went to medical school. I'm a board certified, and I got this degree from Harvard. Can I work for you? And they said, well, of course. What's been taking you so long? And it was like, wow. So that was 28 years. 28 years. So young people, think about that. From the time I picked this magazine up, which changed my life, to the day I started to work for ICR. And that 28 years. So what's the moral of that? Young people, talking to young people, ask the Lord, this is very important, ask the Lord to show you His calling on your life. His calling. And it's never too early to ask what the Lord's calling is. And the calling is, I'm not saying calling you to be a missionary or calling you to be a pastor, but He's calling you to do something for Him. And when you get that idea of what the calling is, like, I'm going to do this creation science ministry, you let that calling help guide your decisions in life. And the Lord may lead you this way, and He may lead you this way, and He may lead you this way, and He may lead you that way. All that time He's doing that, He's equipping you with things that He wants you to be able to do and things that He wants you to know. All that whole way. And you ask Him to do this, and the Bible says He will give you the desires of your heart. And then you'll end up doing what you want Him to do. We don't talk about that much these days, but it's really important. You should be asking the Lord, Lord, please show me what you want me to do. What you want me to do. And let His calling in your life help guide you in these ways. Now, there you go. That's my talk. I can sit down. So that's very, very important here. But you are going to talk with your friends. So we have a talk here. This is going to be lighthearted, lighter. This is, and you notice, I'm not talking like Dr. Clary. If you wanted me to, I could really pick up the pace and I could talk like Dr. Clary really, really fast. But we won't. We'll take it at this slower pace so that everybody can catch on to this. And this is going to be a how-to talk. How to talk with your friends. And they are your friends about evolution. And it's called Exposing the FLUFF. So you can see FLUFF is going to be like an acronym. Or we could even title this, Your Friend Thinks He's Related to a Chimp, Now What? So what are you going to do when you come across something like this? So we have an effective method that we will use to talk to our friends who believe in evolution, like I did. I wish someone would have talked to me a long time before I even went to Moody Bible Institute about creation and evolution. So we want to show that evolution, or evolutionary thinking, is more air than substance. So this acronym works in English. I don't think it'll probably work in Russian. So you'll have to kind of memorize this in English. So we're going to use F. Focus the discussion. We're going to work into our vocabulary the phrase, less than persuaded. Less than persuaded. U, unobserved important events. F, failed mechanism for design. why creatures look so designed, and then finally, the freedom found in creation science. This is a really good way to organize your thoughts, particularly if you're a little nervous or you don't know what to say. So if you can bring something to mind very quickly, fluff, oh, that's it. This week I'm going to do a radio interview on Thursday, and I guarantee you I will follow this in my brain. When I start to talk with the interviewer, I'll start to focus the discussion and do these kinds of things. So this is a way to help you organize your thoughts and get your conversation going. That's what we're after. Now, I see some of you are feverishly taking notes. You're writing notes, you're feverishly taking notes. You're like my wife. She's like a regular note-taking animal. She lives to take notes on that. If you're like me, it's like, gag me. I don't want to take notes. And so we have this little booklet out there. I don't even know how much this booklet is, but it's cheap. We have this little booklet out here, and it has everything that I'm going to say in this little booklet. So if you want to sit back, listen to the discussion, and buy this little booklet, you can skip taking notes. If you like to be like my wife, she'll take notes on the booklet. Anyway, so that's her on that. So you can get the 5 minutes with the Darwinist little booklet. F, focus the discussion. Focus the discussion. Why? Because it's 5 minutes with the Darwinist, so our time is limited, and we want to have to define some terms. The good news is we only need to define two terms, and we want to use some reputable sources. So if we're going to talk to our friends about evolution, you can guess one of the terms that we need to define is what? Evolution. Evolution. So what do we mean when we're talking about that if we're going to use a reputable source? Well, this is a good source. The National Association of Biology Teachers, this is when they were more open and free about their discussion. It's the world's largest teaching association, over 12,000 members. They said the diversity of life on Earth is the outcome of evolution. I think they really want to explain design, but that's okay. I'll live with that. So evolution means more than just change. Evolution means more than just something being different. Evolution is supposed to explain something important. That is, how did we get to the diversity of life on Earth? So if I'm going to be speaking on this interview on Thursday, I'll say to my host, now let's be clear. When I talk about evolution, I'm talking about something that explains the diversity of life on Earth. Is that pretty specific? That narrows it down. And then I might say something like this. Well, you know, evolutionists say that. That's a pretty extraordinary claim. I'm looking for some pretty extraordinary evidence to back it up. And what you've immediately done is you've put them on the defensive. You've put the burden of proof where it should be, and that is the person who's making the claim that evolution explains the diversity of life on Earth. So, extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. And then I want to define my second term, which is just science. What is science? Well, science is a way of knowing about the world. One way of knowing about the world. It is not the way of knowing about the world. It is one way of knowing about the world that is based on observation and testing. Is that what you were taught in school? Science is based on observation and testing. Now, where do I get that? From the National Academy of Sciences. They wrote a book about science and creation. They said scientific investigators seek to understand the natural phenomena by observation and experimentation. That's a long word for me, so I just dropped it to testing. Scientific interpretations of facts and the explanations that account for them, therefore, must be testable by observations and experiments. Now, we have really focused the discussion because we have defined two key terms: evolution, which is supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth, and science, which is based on observation and testing. So I would say, and when I'm talking about science, I'm talking about a way of gaining knowledge which is based on observation and testing. Okay. Remember last night we had quiz time. So we'll have quiz time here today too. All right? So we're going to divide the room right down the middle here. In fact, it looks like we're dividing between families. like between husband and wife and mother and daughter and all of that. Okay, right down the middle. So, all of you on this side of the room, just for today, you get to be the smart side. Smart side. Smart side. And everybody from here over, you get to be the dumb side. Okay? Dumb side. Yeah, okay. Some people say, you nailed it. All right, so that's it. Smart side, dumb side. Okay, smart side. Smart side. Evolution is supposed to explain what? All right, okay. Smart side. Smart side. Yeah. That's right. Evolution is supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth. All right. All right. Okay. Okay. Dumb side. Dumb side. Science is based on observation and right up there on the screen. There you go. So, all right. Observation and testing. Good. Good. All right. We want to work into our vocabulary a new phrase. Less than persuaded. Less than persuaded. Does the woman on the screen look less than persuaded? Yes. She looks pretty skeptical. You know, I don't think men can make that face. And that men can't really make that face, but women make this face all the time. And it's like every time they're listening to something that a man's telling them, they kind of like, oh, like, are you sure? Like as if we would ever lie to you on that. So less than persuaded on here. Less than persuaded means we're skeptical, but we're listening. We're listening, but we're not really persuaded of what they're saying, and we don't want to get into an argument. That's no good. So we don't want to get into that. So we don't want to start off with really unproductive statements like this. I know it's tempting that when the topic comes up to just say, I don't believe in evolution. I know that's easy to say it. But we don't want to say that because we don't want them to just say, well, I don't believe in creation, and boom, you're deadlocked. You've dug in. You're not going anywhere. You might as well be in Congress. So, it's like nothing good is coming out of this. So we want to avoid that kind of thing. Less than persuaded means we've been listening carefully to our teachers, but we don't totally think they've made the case. You notice I didn't say we don't totally believe. We don't think they've made the case for evolution. And it allows for meaningful discussion. When you say, well, I've been listening, but I'm less than persuaded, you haven't closed the door. You haven't closed the door for things. So by saying less than persuaded, it implies a willingness to be convinced. And if you're willing to listen, maybe the person you're talking to will be willing to listen as well. And in addition to that, the word believe sometimes has this idea of faith, like someone who believes in Santa Claus or believes in something that's not really true. So we want to use that I'm less than persuaded. And that's what we have to say. So, well, I think this is that. Saying less than persuaded means that we are listening to their, and the principal evidence that is published in schools is things that we're less than persuaded about. What kinds of things were taught in school? What type of things did you see in your textbook? Well, when you opened up your textbook to look for things about the evolution of life, you saw pictures of all different kinds of dogs. All different kinds of dogs. But they never told you where dogs came from. Or you opened up your textbooks and they showed you different lengths of finch beaks. Big beaks, small beaks. But they never told you where finches really came from. Or you saw that maybe we have similar bones in our arms to similar bones to a dog or a porpoise or a whale or something like that. But I challenge you to open up your textbook and have them explain to you where bones came from and all the information to make a bone. You know, there's more information to make a bone than there would be to build the entire city of Portland or Seattle. That's an incredible amount of information to do that. This is the kind of evidence that you see, but it's not really explaining what evolution is supposed to explain, which is the diversity of life on Earth. And in addition to that, evolution relies on extrapolation, a lot of extrapolation, including a lot of stories, a lot of speculation, and a lot of special effects. That's what you get a lot on Nova, National Geographic, and the other programs. It fills in, and it's subtle, but it's in there. And this is not really observable evidence, therefore it doesn't meet your definition of science. So even the chimps are less than persuaded. This little guy, he's less than persuaded. Wow. Talk about a skeptic. Talk about a born skeptic. I mean, could you imagine raising this guy for the rest of his life? I mean, if he comes out looking like that on there. So, you could say that evolution doesn't meet your criteria of science, which is based on things like observation and testing. Okay, quiz time. We're up to the U, quiz time. So, we'll start over here with smart side again. All right, smart side. All right. Evolution is supposed to explain what? That's right. The diversity, that was more like speaking in tongues, but that wasn't really like, it wasn't like responsive reading, but that's pretty good on there. The diversity of life on Earth. Diversity of life on Earth. Okay. What phrase, smart side, do we want to work out of our vocabulary? Well, I just don't believe in evolution. Yeah, I didn't say you don't believe. You come back, the pastor will say, you come in and say, we don't believe. What's he going to say? No, I don't believe in evolution. Well, I just don't believe in evolution. Okay, dumb side. I know that you're struggling, but I think you can do better. Okay. Science is based on what? Did you hear them? That was really good. They were like with one voice and one mind and one accord on that. Science is based on observation and testing. Cool. What phrase do we want to work into our vocabulary? We are? Did you hear him that time? Yeah, that was good. Pretty good. Less than persuaded. Less than persuaded because of two unobserved, really important events if evolution were really pretty true. One, an unobserved natural origin of life. Unobserved natural. Natural means no cheating. You can't invoke God. It has to be done by totally natural processes. The conditions of life on Earth and things like that. Well, the answer is that nobody knows how that happens. Obviously, no one saw it happen. So that means it's not based on observation or testing. And nobody is close to duplicating it. No one is close to duplicating it. And no one is remotely close to explaining it. Why is that? Do you remember from last night's talk, I said all organisms do 4 things. I know you remember this, you're just being modest, and that you're not telling me. All organisms do 4 things. All organisms grow. All organisms reproduce. All organisms metabolize. And all organisms adapt. We talked about that last night. All organisms do those things. And in order for you to explain life, you have to explain the origin of every single one of those processes. And every one of those processes have the chicken and egg dilemma with them, meaning you need certain parts in order to get the rest of it to function. In other words, you have to have all the parts there at the right time, in the right place, in the right amount. And not only do each of those functions have a chicken and egg dilemma, you have chicken and egg dilemmas between the functions. In other words, how can you reproduce? until you can metabolize and get energy from your environment, or take in things and turn it into energy. Until you can turn the energy in, you have no hope of reproducing. Well, how do you get the ability to metabolize by slow, iterative processes until you can reproduce? Until you can have offspring? Do you see what I'm saying? All of this is very, very hard to explain, so evolutionists have to explain the origin of all of these things in order to explain a natural origin of life. And this is why you can confidently say to your friends, there is not a scientific paper published anywhere on this planet that documents a natural origin of life by observation and testing. You can say that. You know why? I've gone to multiple universities around this country and I have made that statement. There is not a scientific paper published anywhere on this planet that documents this, and nobody at the university has ever come up to me and said, here it is. Here's the paper. You're wrong. Because it's not out there. It's not out there. And I guarantee you, if there was one out there, my evolutionary colleagues would be pointing it out and waving at me and rubbing my face in it. But it's not out there. So that's why there was a report on origin of life researchers done over a decade ago, and this is what the headline is. Don't tell the creationists, but scientists don't have a clue of how life began. And the subtitle said he used that same title decades earlier, and his publisher wouldn't let him use it. But I predict he can use it 2 decades, 4 decades, 5 decades from now. And they're not going to have a clue for this. Not at all. There's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of stories, but in terms of really explaining it, it's not there. The second unobserved important event is after you get life going, and you're going to explain the diversity of life on Earth, you must come up with a mechanism to change one creature into a fundamentally different kind of creature. So, smart side, this is your question. The question will be, what's the second unobserved event? And that is a mechanism that can change one creature into a fundamentally different kind. Not varieties of humans, not varieties of dogs, not varieties of cats, but into something that is completely different. We know there's big varieties of dogs. We can see that, but they're all dogs. Whether you get this football player type of dog or something like that, or some other dog right there, they're all dogs. In addition to that, we see a lot of generations come and go. This paper was published on the 200th anniversary of Charles Darwin's birth. 200th anniversary, and it was reporting on the longest ongoing experiment in evolution. It had been going on for 3 decades. And by the time this paper was published, they were reproducing a bacteria called E. coli. They do that a lot. And they were up to 50,000 generations. Now they're way past that, over 70,000 generations. And this was a 50,000 generation salute to Charles Darwin. They had to come up with something to commemorate his birthday. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out why this is a salute to Charles Darwin in the slightest. Because his theory was supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth, and after 50,000 generations of reproducing E. coli, you can probably guess what they still were. They were what? E. coli. E. coli. Please don't ever salute me with something like that. You know, that doesn't explain anything at all. They found some minor change, and this was supposedly a 50,000 generation salute to E. coli. So 2 very important unobserved events. 1, natural origin of life, and 2, a mechanism to change one creature to a fundamentally different kind. And you know, you can say the same thing about that to your friends. There's not a scientific paper published anywhere on the planet ever that documents one creature changing to a fundamentally different kind. It is not out there. So if evolution was true, you'd have to get life going, and you have to get the diversity, and it strikes out on those two very basic premises. Right at the very beginning, it's 0 for 2. It's wrong on both of those areas. Okay, quiz time. Just to be fair, I'll start with the dumb side, and I will give them a hard question. You probably don't think I've been fair on that, but you're the smart side. You were born with the advantages already, remember? They can't help their disadvantages. All right. Okay, hard question, dumb side on that. Science is based on... You see, I didn't give them the first part, observation and. So, they got the whole thing, observation and testing. All right, what is the very first unobserved important event that makes you less than persuaded? An unobserved natural origin of life. Natural origin of life. Great, really good. Smart side. Evolution is supposed to explain what for us? Diversity of life on Earth. Okay, here's the toughie. The second, oops, almost gave it away. The second unobserved important event is a mechanism. Change one creature to a fundamentally different kind. Right. There we go. Whew. Finally, we have this. Design. Do you know design is the 900-pound gorilla in the room? Design is the general revelation of the Lord Jesus Christ, that He is the Creator. It is this intricate design of creatures. Dr. Ebert talked about the intricate design of solar system and things like that, and they are, but it is really creatures, living creatures, and all of their infinite varieties that is the evidence of the handiwork and workmanship of the Lord Jesus Christ. And all of the scientists, everywhere they look, from microscopic larger, they see evidences of design. And everybody agrees that organisms look like they were designed. There's some evolutionists out there who don't even really get a ton of respect by their colleagues, who try to point out flaws in the human body and flaws in this and flaws in that. Anybody in the know knows that they don't know what they're talking about. That anything that you're looking at in living creatures looks incredibly complicated and incredibly well engineered on that. So most of them, they just agree, well, yes, it does look like it was designed. Darwin didn't even argue the point. He says it looks like it's designed in all these areas. And so you have two explanations for that. Creationists, we state that we have the easy job. Nature looks designed because it really was designed. Do you know that? Everybody naturally goes that way. There have been studies that take small children between the ages of 6 years old and 10-year-old, and you can hold up, for instance, a cat. You can take a cat to these children, and I don't care what country you go to, any country on the planet, and say to these children, where did this cat come from? And you know what they say instinctively? God made it. God made it. That's the natural inclination when they see something like that this was made. And it takes evolutionists years and years and years of training to get that natural inclination worked out of the children, and to say that, well, this cat really looks like it was designed, but it's only illusion because nobody was really designing cats. And that there's another way to explain cats. And in their worldview, evolution is based on this. And this is the best they can come up with. Evolution is based on natural random mistakes, mutations. And we mentioned that last night, that nobody wants the mutations. Nobody wants them. Coupled to this mystical, magical force called natural selection. Well, we can show that this is wrong for several reasons. One, mutations, which they claim are there, are totally random, and they almost always destroy information. They almost always destroy things. In other words, as a medical doctor, we know that when people get cancers or other diseases, there is likely a genetic component to it. There's likely a mutation underlying it. Not for all diseases, but definitely for most all cancers and many of these other diseases. In fact, I'm going to predict that there's probably a genetic component to every disease, that there's multiple factors on it, and a genetic malformation is likely one of them, mostly there. And then second, and this is the most important part, well, how do you overcome this randomness? Well, you couple it with this concept that Darwin invented. You know, nobody came up with that phrase before Darwin. Some people say, well, people saw that organisms lived and died before Darwin. Of course they did. But it was Darwin who invented the concept of natural selection, that there is a natural selector. And as I mentioned last night, it is the attachment of that word selection to nature, which is fundamentally misleading and can never, ever be made not misleading. It was intended to mislead, and it always will mislead. Why is that? Because in order to make a selection, you have to have two things. You have to have intelligence and volition. In fact, the two are probably linked to each other. Intelligence and volition. And Darwin came up with the concept by looking at human breeders. Human breeders, in his example in his book, was looking at pigeon breeders. People that were breeding for all different types and varieties of pigeons. And he said, look, when the pigeon breeder selects for this trait, you get that trait. When they select for another trait, you get those traits. And by selecting for all these different kind of traits, you ended up with all of these different types of pigeons. Big pigeons, small pigeons, in all different shapes and sizes. And if a human can select for traits over time, and you get all of these varieties of pigeons, just think what nature could do if nature is selecting for traits over an immeasurable span of time. Maybe you can get the diversity of life on Earth. The problem is that analogy is fundamentally flawed. It is flawed and it is wrong. Human breeders have intelligence, human breeders have volition, but nature has never had that. Nature is not alive. Nature is full of living things, but nature is not alive any more than Baal is alive or Dagon is alive. And nature cannot act any more than a rabbit's foot can act. The problem is when in your mind you give power to Baal. Everybody know what I'm talking about with Baal, the pagan god? The power doesn't reside in that god. This is a basic theological fact. Idolatry doesn't reside in the idol. Idolatry resides in your mind. It's what you think the idol can do. Are you following me? Idolatry is a personal mental thing of what you think it can do, what you think the statue can do, what you think the rabbit's foot can do. And it's what Darwin projects and he thinks nature selecting can do. So when he projects this word onto nature, he intends to mislead and he intends to give nature agency instead of God's agency. That's why it's fundamentally misleading. And almost immediately, from the time Darwin published his book, people were pushing back and saying, you cannot give selective ability to nature. Do you know the head of the French Academy of Sciences, 2 years after Darwin published his book, said this, well, what Darwin did were silly personifications of nature. The head of the French Academy of Sciences, where he projected onto nature the ability to select like a human. And he called it all kinds of names because he immediately recognized what it was. And so the next time someone says natural selection can act on, natural selection can favor, natural selection can work on, and they're giving nature all of the abilities of God, you just say this: show me the selector. Show me the selector. There isn't any selector. And they'll say, well, it's just a figure of speech, just something like that. Well, then you say, well, figures of speech really can't design. And instead of, and this is so much better, instead of saying that Baal is real, but Baal is weak, and that's all we've been doing, Baal is real, but Baal is weak, we should be saying there is no Baal. And so instead of saying natural selection is real, but it just can't do everything you claim, we should call their bluff and say there is no selector in nature that can act like God. Boom. That's the pushback. There is no selector in nature that can act like God. Wow. Well, what do we have to offer instead? If we can show this idolatry, if we can show the emptiness of their thinking, if we can show the magic in their thinking, then we've put the shoe on the other foot that they're the ones who are believing in mystical things. And we can offer something in its stead. We have something that's more rational. One, when we look at living creatures, we can see something that conforms to the patterns of design. Patterns of design. Now, what are patterns of design? You know them. You know them. They're just not in the top of your thinking right now. So this is what I'd like you to imagine. I'd like you to imagine that you go out and you start your car. I pushed a button now. When I was a kid, I went out and I did this. Vroom, vroom. Anyway, one way or another, you start the car. You pull the latch and you go out to the front of the car and you lift up the hood and you watch the running engine. You watch the engine running. What do you see? Do you see multiple parts working together for a purpose? Yes. Do you see precise timing? Precise timing? Yes. Do you see precise fit and finish? Yes. Do you see something where there is a specific order of putting it together? Yes. Those are patterns of design, and they always come about by engineers, and when you look at creatures, you see the same things. Second, the complexity of those is so complex that the probability of getting them is essentially zero. Essentially zero. And then finally, we see evidences of all or nothing unity. All or nothing unity. When someone says, well, give me an example of that. What's an example of all or nothing unity? Human reproduction. Human reproduction. Why say that? One, everybody knows about it. So you don't have to, it's a scientific thing which everybody knows the basics of on that. So they all understand it. Two, they're all kind of interested in it. So they're not going to say, what? You say reproduction? They're like, oh, okay, I listened to that. And three, it shows that unless you have all of the parts, dad's parts, mom's parts, and even baby, you don't get a baby. And if you don't get a baby, for any kind of creature, evolution comes to a stop. Boom, it's over. Game over. So reproduction shows all or nothing unity, not just within one creature, but between mom, dad, and baby. Boom, 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 boom. That's all or nothing unity. It's really, really good. And then finally, the freedom found in creation science. What do we have better to offer? We have something better in this case. And that not only do we have a better explanation for design, we have a better way of following the evidence wherever it leads. We can follow the scientific evidence wherever it leads on that. I like that freedom, and you should like that freedom too. But our evolutionary colleagues really don't have that freedom. Back in the 1990s, there were debates about teaching creation or evolution in public schools, and one came up in Kansas, and this gentleman writing in Nature, the leading scientific journal of the day, said, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. What? Even if all the data pointed to it, it's excluded? How many of you want other scientists to function like that? I'm a medical doctor. How would you like it if I said, all of the data indicates you've got cancer. Your tests show that you have cancer. Your films show that you have cancer. My examination shows that you have cancer. But I don't believe it. That diagnosis is excluded. So we're not going to treat you for cancer. Or how about, since I was an engineer and we have this monster span here holding up a big piece of roof over our head, how would you like if the engineers said, well, all the information indicates that the beams above our head will not support the snow load, but I don't believe it. Nobody does that. Nobody does it. When the data indicates something, real scientists act on it. They really act on it. So evolutionists really aren't free to follow all the evidence wherever it leads. Second, I like the freedom from magic words not being stuffed into all of my explanations. What kind of magic words? These words. Words like arose, appeared, gave rise to, burst onto the scene, evolved. You know why these are magical words? It's because you can put them in your explanation and say, these animals appeared 65 million years ago. Or these animals burst onto the scene with no evolutionary ancestor so-and-so years ago, and they're skipping over a lot of missing data. A lot of missing data, so they're magical words. One thing I would love to give to all of the young people in this room is one of these clicker things. I had them when I was a kid. It was a piece of bent metal, and you could push on it. It went click, 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 click. You ever had something like that? It made a clicking sound by pushing on the metal. We're gonna do this at ICR. We're gonna get a bunch of these clickers, and then on the back, I'm gonna put ICR, of course, but I'm going to print all of these magic words. Arose, appeared, evolved, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to print them on the back, and we're going to get them into the hands of the kids, your kids. And then the next time they watch Nova or National Geographic, moms, you can give these clickers to the kids, and you can say to them, what? Next time, I want you to listen to the show, and every time you hear these words, do what? Click, 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 click. You can even have a competition, like smart kid versus dumb kid, or something like that, along those lines. And you can have them just click, 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 click. That would not only reinforce them to listen for these magic words, it reinforces the ability to listen carefully to what you're being taught. Listen carefully and to pick it apart. How many of you would get one of those for your kids? How many of you would have it do it while your husband's at home? Click, 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 click. There you go. All right. Click it away all over the place. Magical things. Well, here's an example. Study of salamanders in ponds demonstrates the invisible finger of evolution. What? The invisible finger of evolution. You would think scientists who don't believe in God and who are atheistic, and who say they're totally rational people and they're not mystical in any way wouldn't put stuff like the invisible finger of evolution in their headlines. And that's the best they came up with in this study on salamanders, was that. I also like the freedom from seeing all the design that I see all around us and claiming that it is only an illusion, such as when Richard Dawkins says that biology is the study of complicated things that have the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. He had a book called The God Delusion. I would suggest this next one should be The Self-Delusion, because that's what it is. Or Francis Crick, who was co-discoverer of DNA, Nobel laureate, said, biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. That's kind of like burying your head in the sand and not really looking at the evidence on there. And then finally, I like the freedom from religious statements, religious conclusions, masquerading as science. The evolutionary colleagues, they like to consider themselves just hardcore rationalists, skeptics. As you can see, they really aren't in any of those ways. And they make a lot of religious statements, but they kind of dress them up to look like evolution. Like what? Here's one by Carl Sagan. He begins his book, Cosmos, and the TV program with this same phrase. The cosmos is all there is, or ever was, or ever will be. Cosmos, all there is, ever was, or ever will be. Instinctively, folks, is that a religious statement? Of course it's a religious statement. You can say that's a religious statement, and then when your evolutionary friends say, well, what do you mean by that? It's a religious statement. You don't argue. Don't argue. Don't argue. Just say this. What scientific experiment did Sagan do, and what paper did he publish it in where he demonstrated that the cosmos is all that is, ever was, or ever will be? Is that a good scientific response? It is. He never did an experiment to demonstrate that. He couldn't do an experiment to demonstrate that. This is a statement of faith, a statement of his faith. Here's another statement of faith from Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking was believed to be one of the smartest men on the planet, and he says there is no heaven. Physicist Stephen Hawking says there is no heaven. Here, I'll give this to you in English and then in Russian. Stephen Hawking, the world-renowned theoretical physicist, finds no room for heaven in his vision of the cosmos. The 69-year-old says there is no heaven or afterlife for broken-down computers. That is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark. Well, Dr. Hawking, what experiment did you do to prove there is no heaven? How would you do that experiment? What do you have to do? You have to what? Die, and then you have to be there, and then you got to what? Come back and say, hey, folks, I died. There is no heaven. You can't even do an experiment. You can't do an experiment like that at all. Nobody can do an experiment like that. So I put those down in here so both of them can go side by side. You know what I suggest? Stephen Hawking says, you guys, all of you all believe in heaven because you're afraid to die. Because you're afraid of the dark. Because you're afraid to die. And therefore, because you have this fear of dying, you cling in desperate hope for something that gives you hope for eternal life. You know what I believe? Hawking believes there is no heaven because he's afraid to meet his maker. So he's hoping that there is no afterlife and those kinds of things. But this is the point. How many of you wish you had an opportunity right now to talk to Stephen Hawking? Stephen Hawking. I do. I wish we had an opportunity. And I would share with him all of the things that we just talked about today, While evolution is supposed to explain the diversity of life, it's supposed to be based on observation and testing. It doesn't do any of those things. Stephen Hawking, you know there is no explanation for a natural origin of life. You know that no creature's ever been observed to change from one type to the other. You know you fill in all the gaps with a lot of imaginary stories. Therefore, you know that this really isn't scientific in all of those ways. You know that creatures look incredibly designed. You know, if anybody knows Dr. Hawking, that when something goes wrong, you can face debilitating and devastating disease because of that. You know all of those kinds of things, and that's why, Dr. Hawking, even though I've been listening carefully to you and what others have been telling me, I'm less than persuaded that evolution explains my origins and definitely doesn't explain my destiny. And if I had another 5 minutes to talk with you, Dr. Hawking, just give me another 5 minutes, I'd like to introduce you to the one who is your creator. That is the Lord Jesus Christ. That's what we want to do. We want to point all of those things out. And that's why it's important to take 5 minutes with a Darwinist. And if you want to talk with your other friends about design and engineering, someone asked me, what is this book about? This fits perfectly with what we're talking about. Clearly seen, constructing solid arguments for design. This is the second how-to book. This is a book on how to talk with your friends about all of the design that you see, and you can talk about purpose, you can talk about fit, you can talk about finish, you can describe all of these things to your friends. This is a how-to book to share with your friends about that because someone asked me about it. And made in His image, it's really not a book about theology. This goes through 14 systems on your body. 14 systems, and explains how all the parts, in order to get them to work, had to be at the right time, in the right place, in the right amount. So on my heart, from my history, I wanted people to be equipped in order to be able to share with their friends about evolution. So they didn't end up in the position I was in, where I fully believed what my teachers taught me in an uncritical way. And that's what we're after here. So please, equip yourselves. Please sign up for our free magazine. Maybe it'll change your life like it changed mine.